Over the past decade, we've seen a number of watershed moments in the struggle to end gendered violence. From the MeToo movement that spread all the way from Hollywood to our homes to the enormous courage of advocates like Tame and Brittany Higgins. But new data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics leads us to question how much progress has actually been made. They've revealed in the decade to 2020, Australian police recorded a 13% jump in the number of sexual assault offenders, not offences. That's the actual number of perpetrators, and 97% of them were men. And the crimes of more than half of the offenders were serious enough to require hearings in the higher courts, such as county or Supreme Courts. Now, statistics like this hit you like a punch in the gut, and while a rise in the willingness to report assault might account for some of the increase, it does nothing to dampen the genuine pain and rage felt by women across the country upon hearing news like this. Our panellist Amy Remeikis knows this more than most. Her new book, On Reckoning, is about working through the last year in Canberra and the way the political can become very quickly personal. Amy, I commend you on the book. It's one of these, I've left it in my bag downstairs. It's one of those small little books that you can get at the bookshop, or I imagine order online. And I read it in one sitting, not intending to do so. And it was a very coherent essay on what's happened in the last year. And what you talked about from the first words was rage and anger that women and vulnerable people experience that doesn't go away. What is this rage and where does it come from?
It's different for everybody. I think it's really individual, but I see it as a very righteous anger that has compounded over years, decades, centuries of these issues just being ignored, of just having to see people growing up with the same issues that you experienced. And it's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking to watch the next generation go through exactly what you went through and know that the generation above you also went through that and there hasn't been any change. I mean, those numbers that you just pointed to show that. This is not a new issue. What I'm talking about is something that people have been speaking about, screaming about for so long, and yet we're still having to have these conversations.
Okay, and I'm not asking you to reflect personally, but about what? Be specific. What is it where does the rage come from? What treatments does the rage result from?
I think it results from being ignored and having a huge part of this issue of sexual and gendered violence ignored, and that is the role of men in it, because overwhelmingly the perpetrators are men, and yet we keep having to hear from women and other vulnerable people about what is happening to them, and we only steer the conversation to those people who have experienced the violence. They have to perform their trauma. We have to get out and tell our stories. We have to scream it from the rooftops, and then we're told how to protect ourselves, how to be safe in different areas, what we need to do, and we don't seem to be talking about what led a particular man to decide that he could have ownership over another human being. We don't have that conversation.
The other thing, Anne, that Amy talks about in the book After Rage is anger. And she says study after study into anger shows how women suffer professionally from displaying the emotion while men are rewarded. An angry man is credible. An angry woman is told, calm your tits, settle pedal, keep your hair on, calm the farm. You've heard all those, I imagine?
Oh yeah, I heard them, had them directed to me and observed them with my other friends and colleagues, and lots of my friends are subject to the same thing. And I think Amy capturing that the catalyst that I hope is an advance of social change is amazingly wonderful, and I so hope the energy keeps going because something has to change.
Talk to me about your experience of displaying that anger. I mean, you were dragged backwards through the political process, you were disendorsed. You know, that was a very difficult personal time for you, and there was a moment where you got angry. Yeah, there was a moment that I got angry. It was when my campaign team had been effectively guillotined, and I don't often yell, but I let fly, and it was recorded in the minutes as I had thrown a hissy fit, and that I had displayed
behaviour that was unbecoming, and I thought, you just ruined my life. What do you expect me to say? Oh, thank you. So yeah, I was pretty angry for quite some time.
And were you aware, I mean, other than the minutes, over the course of your life, that you're not, as a woman, you're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to push it down, aren't you?
Yeah, you're supposed to suppress all that and not express it and take it on the chin and pretend that it didn't happen. Well,
otherwise?
Well, my career was gone. But, and the forum was correct for me to do what I did. And I would never suggest that any woman being that angry should have a one-on-one with somebody. She needs to get a little bit of distance there, because you're likely to say something you're seriously going to regret. But don't lose that anger. Channel it. Make sure you're directing it to a place and a space where you can make a difference, which is what Amy's done, which Miss Tame did. I don't think we're finished yet, not by a long shot, but there seems to be this, and I was saying earlier to somebody else that a young boy was kicking a young girl's chair in a primary school. And he was asked the question, well, she was asked the question when she reported it, well, maybe he likes you. This is primary school. Do we have to be horrible in order to let somebody know we like them? What's wrong with, hey, excuse me, I really like you. Would you like to be my friend? Right? These are the things that we need to change right from the littlies. It's not about showing respect. It's changing the verbal behaviours and the interaction behaviours from a young age that teaches the respect and personal space respect as we get older.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a long time before we actually get it happening, but don't lose the rage and don't lose the anger.
Amy, I was fascinated that you write about a woman in the supermarket who says to you, it's liberating to be this angry and not have to hide it. There's something in there about the fact that you were hearing the voices in stereo. You were hearing collectively what people, women and other vulnerable people, just quietly keep to themselves.
Because we're told to keep it to ourselves. I think that it's really quite rare to see an angry woman, or particularly to see an angry woman of colour or another minority express anger and rage, because we don't allow it. We don't allow it in this space. I mean, even Anne just then, you know, saying stay angry, but also cautioning that you don't be angry in the moment. But we should be angry in the moment. We should address these things as they come up, because the men do. But yet we're not allowed to have that same anger and have that same space. We're told we're hysterical. We're told that we should just be polite. We're told to mind our manners. And I don't think that we should anymore, because that's been part of the problem. Telling someone to mind their manners or to smile is another way of telling people to be quiet, and that you don't deserve a space at the table until you're ready to have a rational, civilized conversation. But this is not a rational, civilized issue, and we do not have to respond in a civilized, polite manner.
I wonder, Priya, if different cultures have different experiences or enforce different rules about how women are expected to act, and who enforces those? I mean, have you ever had the experience of other women telling you to shut up, be quiet, taking the oxygen out of the room?
I feel, yes, I have. And as Amy was talking then, I was furiously nodding, because I thought the anger is within me, and I know so many other women around me who have it. But you add the additional layer of being a BIPOC woman, a woman of colour, and there's an additional anger there, because there's all this other context that a lot of people might not understand. But to just go back a moment to the little people we speak about, I have a 5-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son, and the word bossy is banned in our home, because I have seen this notion that women should be quieter, not hysterical, noisy, articulate. It stems from childhood. And I've had people tell my very articulate, very intelligent, and a very proud mum daughter, you know, gosh, she's so bossy. And I say to them, that's a word that's banned in our home, because you wouldn't use it to describe my son and his leadership qualities, but you'll use it on my daughter. So it's banned. Please don't use it. I feel like it's the moment you are passionate, the moment you are angry, it's the hysterical brush that comes out. And I'm with you, Amy. It's within me, and I'm trying to direct it into good manners, as you say, Anne.
And describe the particular experience of being a woman of colour within that experience of anger and discrimination.
Well, for me, it's about representation. A lot of my anger stems from representation, and it really matters. So I look at Parliament here, for instance, and there's not many women, but there's certainly no women of colour that I can easily see. I look at, my mum's a QC, I look at the federal court in Australia. The judges are predominantly Caucasian men. If there are some women, they're Caucasian. I don't see people who look like me in places that matter, in positions of power, and it really matters. And that's where a lot of my anger comes from, that I don't see BIPOC individuals reflected in positions of power, even TVs, magazine covers. They don't represent the people on our streets, the people who work in my clinic with me, the people who go to my daughter's school. And that's where a lot of my anger comes from as a BIPOC person. I want change. I want there to be true diversity, not just the word.
Amy, you spend a bit of the book talking about the Prime Minister's fumbling attempts to respond to Brittany Higgins' description of what allegedly happened to her at Parliament House. It was February 2021. Gosh, time is meaningless in COVID. Let's just be reminded of how he dealt with it.
Jenny and I spoke last night, and she said to me, you have to think about this as a father first. What would you want to happen if it were our girls? Jenny has a way of clarifying things, always has.
Now, Amy, you write in the book you had a visceral reaction. You were working, you were in Parliament House, you were listening and reporting on that. You write, I don't know what came first, the tears or the sound, too guttural to be called a scream, too broken to be a roar.
Yeah, and it still really impacts me because I just don't understand that attitude at all. And I know that there are quite a lot of people who immediately jump to thinking about their own loved ones. I understand that. What I don't understand is why you have to think about your loved ones in order to have empathy and understanding about this issue. Why do you have to put someone else's face in place of another person's story in order to understand it? I don't understand that at all.
Yeah. And I mean, as a survivor yourself, are you saying that the message you heard is just you, Amy, are not enough? You're not worthy of my empathy. I have to imagine you as someone I'm related to you in order to relate.
Well, absolutely. And in my second attack, it actually was, I was saved by a lovely couple who came back and saved me after they saw me struggling with a man on the street, because they'd originally driven past because they thought it was just a domestic or just, you know, a couple having a fight, despite the fact that I felt I was fighting for my life on the ground on the side of the road just to stay in the light, because I've been raped before and I know what happens when women are dragged into the dark. So I was fighting. But they came back, and as they were taking me to the police station, they said that they returned because they thought, what if it was our daughter? We would want somebody to help. And I just think we should want to help anyway. We shouldn't have to imagine daughters. And it's not just about me, because I am so lucky. I am a white woman. I look like the sort of person that people want to listen to on this, because I look like a lot of people's daughters. There are so many people we don't even give this space to. And we need to start doing that, because if you're imagining me in the place of somebody else, it means you're ignoring a huge, huge, huge part of this problem.
Pete, let me turn to you. Another point Amy makes is, and a long-term GP said it to us on the program the other night. She said, you know, after people started to trust her in this little town, she began to think, gosh, am I the only one who hasn't been sexually assaulted in this little town? That's obviously not true, but the number of people who were disclosing to her because they came to trust her. And Amy makes the point that we all know someone who's been assaulted, and yet we don't all know a perpetrator, and yet statistically that's not possible. We must know a good guy who's done it.
We must. I mean, back in the in the 80s, my job, I dealt with people getting out of prison looking for work. And one thing I discovered is a rapist is a rapist is a rapist. There's nothing about going to jail that would cure that. And the victims were anonymous. Nobody know. I don't know what happened to them. And you think that's awful. And the descriptions we're getting now says something has to change. One of the good things about the event that Brittany Higgins and Tame were at in front of Parliament House is my understanding about 25-30% of the participants were men, or the people that responded. And I know a lot of blokes out there that want to do something about this. Now, they're afraid, we're afraid, because you can get your head kicked in very quickly by putting it up and saying, what can I do? So what we're going to do is engage among ourselves and say, right, what can we do together?
And is that, in a sense, Pete, about, how can I put it, blokes not covering for each other? Not saying he couldn't have done that, he's a good fella. Yeah.
Well, it's also...
He doesn't need to have horns.
Well, that's right, and that's what we... Well, I suppose talking to blokes, you often know someone who's not a good person, and you know you wouldn't trust them. Now, back in the day, I know when there were managers of public service offices, and you knew that they were a predator, so people would warn the women would warn each other, and off you would go. And of course, we know, well, hang on a minute, that's wrong, and that's what we've got to change. It still happens. It still happens that women get told, be careful of this bloke.
Yeah, we read about it with Rio Tinto yesterday when they released their report.
Blokes should be able to do it, but blokes shouldn't be punished for that either. That's the other issue. Women get worried about being punished, and you can see why, and so do blokes. So we need to have men, and one of them, stand up and say, this isn't good enough, and name and shame people, and we need to do it, and we need to do it soon.
Okay. Let me go back to you, Amy. We started this program talking about the importance of not shouting at people who won't have a vaccine, that was not the way to persuade them to have a vaccine. And yet what you're saying, what Anne's saying, what Priya's saying is that we need this anger and we need to keep shouting. How does shouting help?
Well, it helps you to be heard in an issue that we have been talking about for centuries. And when we talk about this rage and shouting, I don't necessarily mean that you have to go and scream on a street corner. I mean that you don't shut up, that you don't stop talking, that you just keep the conversation going and you keep demanding that there is action and accountability on this. I mean, you started this segment with the Prime Minister talking about how he needed to be reminded of his daughters by his wife in order to understand this issue. In an earlier press club address this week, he referred to Brittany Higgins and the situation she found herself in. And that's the sort of stuff that we immediately need to call out and immediately need to change, because if we have somebody just talking about what we need to do in those sorts of terms, then we're never actually going to see the people stand up and say we need to stop this. And we do need, as Peter says, the men to start stepping up, because we constantly keep talking about this as a women's issue and it's not. If we were to change perhaps how we talk about the statistics, so instead of the fact that one woman a week is going to be murdered by her partner, if we started talking about how a man in Australia is going to become a murderer once a week, or if we talk about how 1 in 3 men are going to be a sexual assaulter or a sexual abuser, perhaps we're going to start to see a bit of a change, and we will have to start looking at the men around us and kind of going, what are you doing? Because at the moment, it doesn't seem to be a lot.
Amy, thank you so much for your passion. Thank you for the book. It's called On Reckoning. Available now, and if you've been affected by anything we've been discussing, call Lifeline 13 11 14, 1800 RESPECT, 1800 737 732.